$800 million in cash, 6,000 sailors, zero banks, zero ATMs, the U.S. Navy solved this problem decades before Apple Pay existed and built something far more powerful than anyone outside the fleet ever realized. How does an entire economy function in the middle of the ocean, completely cut off from the rest of the world? Let's find out. Every single year, at the peak of the old system, the United States Navy physically transported more than $800 million in paper currency to its fleet. Not wired, not transferred electronically, physically moved in armored cases, under armed escort, across docks and gangways, and onto warships, sailing into some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. The logistics cost alone consume roughly 6% of every dollar transported. That means for every $1 million the Navy moved, $60,000 simply evaporated into security fees, courier contracts, and administrative overhead before a single sailor touched a single bill. Now multiply that across an entire global fleet. The number becomes almost incomprehensible. An aircraft carrier is not a ship, it is a city. The USS Nimitz, CVN-68, a nuclear-powered Nimitz-class carrier commissioned in 1975, displaces over 100,000 tons of water and stretches 1,092 feet from bow to stern, longer than the Chrysler Building is tall. At full deployment, she carries between 5,000 and 6,000 personnel. There is a hospital with full surgical capability. There are 2 nuclear reactors powering everything on board. There are 70 to 90 combat aircraft on the flight deck. But for most of the Navy's history, there was no ATM, no bank branch, no digital wallet, just cash stuffed into safes, handed out in envelopes, and guarded like contraband in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Picture a 19-year-old petty officer 3rd class in E4 reporting to his first ship deployment in the late 1990s. His monthly base pay is roughly $1,200. At the dispersing office, a clerk counts out the bills and slides them across a metal counter. That sailor now has to store his entire month's earnings somewhere on a vessel shared with 5,000 strangers, operating under extreme stress, in close quarters where privacy is a luxury almost nobody has. Some sailors lock cash in their berthing lockers. Others stuffed it into boots or inside the lining of their uniforms. Stories of sailors losing their entire month's pay within the first 3 weeks of deployment were not rare. They were routine. The enemy was not foreign. It was the environment itself. Between 1990 and 2000, theft and petty larceny were among the most frequently reported crimes aboard U.S. Navy vessels. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, documented that a significant percentage of these theft incidents were directly linked to cash storage in berthing compartments, the cramped 6-man sleeping quarters where sailors had almost no secure space to protect their valuables. The psychology was predictable. Take 5,000 people, remove them from their families for 180 days, add physical exhaustion, limited personal freedom, and the constant presence of large amounts of untraceable cash, and you have created a textbook pressure cooker for financial crime. This was not a character failure. It was a system failure. The dispersing officer aboard a Nimitz-class carrier did not have an easy job. That officer, typically a lieutenant junior grade 02 or lieutenant 03, was personally accountable for a shipboard cash reserve ranging from $400,000 to $600,000 at any given time. Every single dollar had to be logged, reconciled, and accounted for in daily reports filed with the ship's commanding officer and ultimately traceable back to the U.S. Department of the Treasury. A $50 discrepancy was not a rounding error. It was the beginning of a formal investigation. The paperwork burden alone consumed dozens of man-hours per week, and hours that could have been spent on mission readiness, training, or simply keeping the ship operational. The solution did not come from Silicon Valley. It did not come from a defense contractor's boardroom. It came from the Navy's own recognition that the system was broken beyond repair. In 2001, the U.S. Navy partnered with the Department of the Treasury to launch Navy Cash, a stored value card system that would eliminate the need for physical currency aboard ship. The pilot program launched aboard the USS John F. Kennedy CV-67, a Kitty Hawk class conventional carrier commissioned in 1968. The results were so immediate and so dramatic that the Navy fast-tracked a fleet-wide rollout within a few years. Think about what you just do in your daily life without a second thought. Tap a card, buy a coffee, check your balance on your phone. Now imagine doing none of that for 6 months. That was a reality these sailors lived. If you have never thought about how money works 1,000 miles from the nearest shore, drop a comment below and tell us what surprises you most. And if you want more stories like this, one story is about the systems hiding in plain sight inside the world's most powerful military. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. It takes 3 seconds and it means everything to us. But here is where the story gets complicated. When Navy Cash launched, the Navy did not just solve the cash problem. They built something far more powerful, a self-contained financial network operating in complete isolation from the rest of the world. And that raises one question that almost nobody asks when a closed financial system controls the economic life of 6,000 people with no outside oversight. Who is actually in charge? The Navy Cash Card looks unremarkable. It is the size of a standard credit card. It has a MasterCard logo on the front. To someone who has never served, it looks like something you would pick up at any bank. But inside that plastic rectangle lives one of the most sophisticated dual architecture payment systems ever deployed in a military environment. A system engineered to function whether the ship is docked in Yokosuka, Japan, or sailing in complete electronic blackout 800 miles from the nearest coast. Understanding how it actually works requires understanding that the card is not one system. It is two completely separate systems that happen to share the same piece of plastic. The embedded chip on the front of the card, the closed-loop system, operates on a principle of total self-sufficiency. It stores electronic value directly on the card itself, not on a remote server, not in the cloud, not dependent on any satellite connection. When a sailor taps that chip at a point-of-sale terminal aboard ship, the transaction is processed entirely within the ship's internal network. No signal leaves the hull, no data packet reaches the internet. The transaction is validated, logged, and completed in under 2 seconds using nothing but the ship's own infrastructure. This is not a feature. It is a deliberate architectural decision built around one core military reality in a contested electronic environment. You cannot trust that any external connection will survive. The infrastructure supporting Navy Cash runs on a segmented portion of the Navy Marine Corps Intranet known as NMCI, isolated specifically for financial processing. Each Nimitz class and Gerald R. Ford-class carrier has dedicated transaction servers installed in hardened compartments below the main deck. These servers manage every single closed-loop transaction independently of external communications. A Nimitz-class carrier CVN-68 through CVN-77, or Gerald R. Ford-class carrier CVN-78, onward operating at full capacity, processes thousands of individual Navy cash transactions per day across approximately 400 to 500 point-of-sale terminals and 12 to 15 cashless ATM kiosks distributed across 4.5 acres of flight deck, hangar bay, berthing areas, and service spaces. Every terminal, every kiosk feeds back into those onboard servers in real time. Here's where the engineering gets genuinely remarkable. When the carrier enters port or achieves a stable satellite link via the Military Strategic and Tactical Relay Satellite System, MILSTAR, or the newer Mobile User Objective System, known as MUOS, the Navy cache servers perform what the system architects call a reconciliation cycle. In plain language, every transaction that occurred since the last connection is packaged, encrypted using AES 256, the same 256-bit advanced encryption standard used to protect classified government communications and transmitted to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, which serves as the financial backend for the entire program. The reconciliation window typically runs between 2 and 4 hours. During that window, account balances are updated, split pay allocations are processed, and the Treasury's records are brought into sync with what happened 800 miles out to sea. The second system, the open loop, is the magnetic stripe on the back of the card. This stripe connects directly to the sailor's personal bank account back home and functions as a standard MasterCard debit card, accepted at more than 23 million merchant locations across 210 countries and territories. When the USS Harry S. Truman CVN 75 pulls into Suda Bay, Crete, or when the USS Ronald Reagan CVN 76 makes a port call in Busan, South Korea, the sailor walks off the gangway and uses the exact same card to buy food, withdraw local currency from one of more than 2 million MasterCard linked ATMs worldwide, or pay for transportation, all at standard interbank exchange rates with no manual currency conversion required. Before Navy cash, that sailor would have queued at a shipboard currency exchange window, paid a spread of 3% to 5% on every dollar converted, and carried a wallet full of foreign bills through a foreign city. There is one detail about this system that almost nobody outside the Navy knows, and it reveals exactly how seriously the Navy takes security. Every civilian contractor, maintenance technician, or official visitor who comes aboard a carrier equipped with Navy cash receives a temporary visitor card preloaded with a hard spending limit. That limit cannot be exceeded. Every single transaction made with that visitor card is automatically logged with 3 data points, the exact timestamp, the specific terminal ID, and the physical location of that terminal within the ship. The ship's security officer can pull a complete movement and spending history for any visitor card at any time. The Navy is not just running a payment system, it is running a real-time accountability infrastructure embedded inside a payment system. In a modern naval combat scenario, the kind of environment the U.S. Pacific Fleet trains for, in exercises like RIMPAC, involving 26 nations and over 25,000 personnel electronic warfare, is not a hypothetical. GPS jamming, satellite communication disruption, and network intrusion attempts are all standard threat categories. A Nimitz-class carrier operating under electronic warfare conditions may lose external communication links entirely for periods ranging from hours to days. During every one of those hours, the closed-loop system continues processing transactions without interruption. A sailor can still buy a meal, purchase toiletries from the ship's store, or get a haircut because the system was designed from the ground up to assume that external connectivity is a privilege, not a guarantee. If you were a cyber warfare officer and you had 30 minutes to attempt to disrupt a carrier's financial operations from the outside, what would you target first? Drop your answer in the comments. The responses might surprise you. The closed loop hell? The architecture proved itself in real deployments, in real combat environments, across more than 150 ships and 20 years of operation. But an airtight technical system and a perfectly functioning human community are two very different things. So, what actually happened when 6,000 men and women had to live inside this economy for 200 consecutive days? And did the system make them better or worse at handling money when they finally came home? The USS Gerald R. Ford CVN 78, commissioned in 2017, at a construction cost of $13.3 billion, carries approximately 4,539 sailors during normal operations, a number that swells to nearly 6,000 when the embarked carrier air wing arrives. Every single one of those people needs to eat, get a haircut, buy toothpaste, and find some way to decompress after 12-hour shifts in one of the most demanding workplaces on Earth. The ship's store, serving this population, generates an estimated $2 to $3 million in revenue over a standard 6-month deployment. Every dollar of profit does not go to a shareholder. It flows directly into the ship's morale. Welfare and recreation fund the MWR program, which pays for movie screenings, gym equipment, and the small daily comforts that keep 6,000 people psychologically functional 1,000 miles from home. Here is something the Navy did not fully anticipate. Research conducted at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, found that sailors using Navy cash saved an average of 23% more of their monthly pay compared to those managing physical cash. The explanation is a behavioral economics phenomenon called the pain of paying. When you physically hand over bills, your brain registers a real-time loss. When you tap a card, that psychological friction disappears entirely. Spending feels invisible, almost abstract. Aboard a carrier, However, the closed loop architecture enforces hard spending limits and split pay allocations, strip away large portions of income before the sailor ever sees them, meaning the system itself provides the financial discipline that willpower alone often cannot sustain. But eliminating cash did not eliminate informal financial activity, it simply changed its shape. In a closed environment of 6,000 people under extreme stress, informal gambling card games, sports betting pools, small stakes competitions never fully went away. Without physical bills as the medium, informal debts became social obligations tracked by memory and reputation. The Navy responded by embedding a spending alert feature into the Navy cash backing. Any account processing an unusual volume of small transactions within a compressed time window, a pattern consistent with rapid informal redistribution of funds triggered an automatic flag to the ship's disbursing officer for review. The system was not just processing payments, it was watching patterns. Consider the wife of a chief petty officer, E7 in San Diego, California. Her husband's total compensation, including sea pay and deployment allowances, runs approximately $5,200 per month. Under the Navy cash split pay arrangement, she receives up to 70% of that automatically deposited into their joint account on the 1st and 15th of every month, no manual action required after the initial setup. Before this system, that family depended on paper allotment checks routed through military APO/FPO postal addresses, sometimes taking 3 to 4 weeks to arrive. Mortgage payments were missed, car insurance lapsed. These were not edge cases. They were the standard experience of military family finance for decades, and Navy cash ended them almost overnight. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower CVN 69, a Nimitz-class carrier commissioned in 1977, became a test platform for the next evolution of shipboard retail, the micromarket. Unlike a traditional ship store staffed by Navy exchange personnel, this is an unmanned retail space operating 24 hours a day. Computer vision cameras identify which products a sailor picks up, automatically deduct the correct amount from their Navy cash account, and log the transaction with a timestamp and terminal location. The shrinkage rate losses due to theft or error runs below 0.3% in operational data from these installations. For context, the average shrinkage rate across U.S. retail is approximately 1.6%. An unstaffed store on a warship, paid for exclusively through a traceable electronic card, loses less product than almost any store in America. If you were 20 years old, 200 days from home, earning $2,000 a month with nowhere to spend it except a ship store and a barber, what would you actually spend it on? Be honest in the comments, because the answers say more about human nature than most people expect. 20 years of clean data, 150 ships, hundreds of millions of transactions, a system that simultaneously protected sailors, their families, and the Navy's financial integrity. By every measurable standard, Navy cash worked. But what happens when the most powerful Navy in the world decides that working is no longer good enough? And what they build to replace it carries implications that go far beyond buying a candy bar at sea. Navy cash was never a standalone project. It was the third pillar of a financial architecture that the Department of Defense and the U.S. Treasury built together across a decade of deliberate, quiet work. Easy Pay launched in 1997 for Army, Air Force, and Marine Corps recruits at basic training installations. Eagle Cash followed in 1999 for ground forces deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan places where carrying physical dollars created lethal security vulnerabilities in active combat zones. Navy Cash extended the architecture to sea in 2001. Together, these three programs eliminated the operational need for $4.1 billion in physical currency the military previously had to source, transport, guard, and account for every single year. During the Iraq War, moving $1 million in physical cash to forward units cost approximately $60,000 in security and logistics overhead. Electronic systems cut that cost to nearly zero. The transition to the next generation platform, Eagle Cash Navy, Cash is not a software patch. The new system supports NFC contactless payment, eliminating card insertion entirely. It integrates fingerprint biometric authentication as a secondary identity layer, replacing the PIN that has served as the primary security mechanism since 2001. Most significantly, the new card is being engineered for full compatibility with the Common Access Card, the CAC, the DoD's Universal Smart Credential, used for physical access control, network login authentication, and official digital signature authority. One card that pays for your lunch, unlocks the classified compartment, authenticates your network session, and verifies your identity at every security checkpoint on the ship. This is not a convenience upgrade. It is a fundamental convergence of financial infrastructure and security infrastructure into a single control system. Here's the detail that reframes everything. Every Navy cash transaction, every vending machine, tap. Every micromarket scan. Every barber payment generates a metadata record containing a timestamp accurate to the second. The terminal's unique ID, its physical deck location, and the transaction value. Across 20 years and more than 150 ships, the system has processed over 200 million individual transactions. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, has confirmed in public reporting that transaction data has been used as evidence in multiple internal investigations, providing precise movement timelines for personnel of interest. The payment system is also a surveillance system. These were never mutually exclusive. They were always the same system. The People's Liberation Army Navy has been watching. Both the Liaoning CV-16 and the Shandong CV-17 operate internal cashless payment infrastructures built on broadly similar principles, but with one critical difference. The planned system is reported to integrate with China's social credit system framework, meaning a sailor's purchasing behavior and spending patterns aboard ship can feed into a centralized behavioral scoring mechanism that follows that individual throughout their military and civilian life. The contrast could not be sharper. The American system was designed to protect sailors and their families. The Chinese system appears engineered to score and monitor them. This is the quiet front of a much larger competition, fought not with aircraft or missiles, but with data architecture embedded in the daily financial lives of naval personnel. Consider the full distance traveled. A 19-year-old petty officer stuffing $1,200 into his boot in the late 1990s because there was nowhere safe to keep it. A dispersing officer losing sleep over a $400,000 cash safe in the Arabian Sea. A family in San Diego waiting 4 weeks for a check that may never arrive. And now, a single biometric card processing a contactless transaction in under 2 seconds, reconciling every penny to the Federal Reserve through AES 256 encrypted satellite channels the moment a communications window opens. More than 150 ships, more than $660 million in electronic value under active management, more than 200 million transactions processed, and 99% of Americans have never heard the name Navy Cash. This was never just a story about money. It was always a story about how a nation treats the people it asks to stand watch in the dark, hundreds of miles from the nearest shore, so the rest of us never have to think about it. If this changed how you see the Navy, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks they already know everything about the most powerful fleet in the world, because they almost certainly do not know this.